Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on suicide prevention for young workers in the construction industry. Thanks for joining us and for supporting this year's Safe Work Month with a host of events scheduled for today right through until the end of October. I'm Chris Bombolis, the Media Manager for the Office of Industrial Relations and your host for today's discussion. We're here to talk about suicide prevention for young workers in the construction industry. Now, whether you're a supervisor, apprentice, health and safety representative, or have a loved one working in the construction industry, welcome, one and all. I recognise some viewers may find the content of this discussion distressing. If you or someone you know is looking for support or help, contact 000 immediately if it's an emergency, or Lifeline's 24-hour hotline on 13 11 14. Sadly, young males working in the construction industry in Queensland are at a higher risk of suicide and are twice as likely to take their own life than other young Australian males. These are frightening statistics, and we all have an important role to play in turning this around. It can be prevented. Today, we're going to talk about what's going on in the construction industry and the unique risk factors for young workers that are contributing to this overrepresentation. To explore and discuss these issues, as well as give you practical strategies you can use in your workplace to support young workers, I'm joined by CEO of Mates in Construction in Queensland, Jorgen Gullestrup. Mates in Construction is a mental health and suicide prevention program designed for the building and construction industry. Jorgen is a suicide survivor and brought this lived experience and his background as a construction worker to the design of the Mates program. Welcome, Jorgen, and thanks for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Pleasure. Jorgen, tell us a bit about yourself and why you were inspired to start such an invaluable community organisation like Mates in Construction.
Well, about this time you probably worked out that this accent is not Australian. So I was born in Denmark and I'm a plumber by trade. I developed a mental illness when during my apprenticeship and I survived suicide and I actually arrived in Australia as part of my recovery to reinvent myself as a well person. Mm-hmm. And in Australia, I did what migrants do so well. I told Australians everything you did wrong and why you should do things more like we do in Denmark. So the natural progression was to become a union official. Yep. And through that, I was a union official for 13 years and I lost several mates to suicide. And that was an experience that other people in similar roles to myself had. And we started talking about, is this right? Is this just what our industry is like? Should we accept this? And it led to the industry saying we need to get some research done. And we partnered up and we got some research done that actually showed us that suicide rates amongst workers in the industry were particularly high. And particularly amongst young workers, it was very high. And so we got that report and we sat down and we looked at it as somebody should be doing something about it. And somebody never turned up. And we realized maybe somebody was us. And that was the start of Mates in Construction, was the industry simply said, we can't accept this to go on. Mm-hmm. This is not okay, and we have to make a difference. And that became the start for Mates in Construction. We were funded by the Building Employees Redundancy Trust to just go out and find out what can we actually do as construction workers to make a difference to this.
Mm-hmm. Now, your experiences, both in life and work, and your passion and the work of Mates is invaluable to the industry. As well as that passion, as you've touched on, there's been a lot of research over the years to help shape programs like Mates. A report released earlier this year showed some very alarming statistics about high rates of suicide and suicidal thoughts for construction apprentices. Can you tell us about that report, a little more about it, and what were the goals of the study and who were they actually targeting?
Yeah, so we've been working in this industry since 2008 now. So, and we've been going through that, and we're talking to workers on site about how we look out for each other and our mental health and how we approach people who are struggling. We've also been going to apprentices and providing them life skills training. So how do we actually deal with relationships and drugs and alcohol and all those kind of things? And we came to a point where we said, perhaps we need to just have a look at that again. Is that the right approach? And we got this brilliant idea that perhaps the starting point was to actually talk to apprentices about what they were experiencing before we started designing something for them.
Fair enough.
So we conducted a number of focus groups, where we got apprentices together and asked open questions about what makes a difficult day at work, what makes it hard to get at work in the morning, and what came back was very overwhelmingly that a lot of bullying was often an issue that apprentices felt powerless in dealing with. They felt that they had one go at getting their apprenticeship, and if they spoke up about the circumstance they were finding themselves in, perhaps they wouldn't be able to complete their education. Mm. So we got that back and said, well, that didn't tell us much about doing life skills, but it certainly told us that there were some issues we needed to understand better if we wanted to be serious about suicide prevention in the construction industry. And with that, we then went back to Griffith University, who did the focus group studies for us, and said, we need to understand this better. And we designed this study where we went out to close to 1,500 apprentices and asked into all the things we had uncovered through those focus groups and said, what is your experience about bullying? We asked them directly, have you experienced bullying? And we asked them indirectly about whether you have been exposed to the kind of circumstances which would equate to bullying. So that's the background to that report.
Yes. And we will link to that report at the end of this event for our digital viewers and on our website for those who want to read it a little later. What were some of the topics covered in the survey? And then there is a hesitancy to speak out. Were they happy to speak out in a survey situation?
Yes, they were. I want to say two things, because the construction industry is a great industry. Mm-hmm. It's a fantastic place to live, and we're creative and all that. And so it's very easy when we talk about mental health and suicide to think doom and gloom and it's all bad. Well, the survey firstly told that by far most apprentices had a good experience. Yes. More than 70% of the apprentices felt that they were well supported, were well supervised, were well respected by their employer. So what we are talking about is what's happening for a minority of apprentices but a significant minority.
Yeah. And we can't forget about them, can we?
No, we can't forget about them, and we need to address them because they're the ones who are in crisis. But I don't want to beat up the industry, because the industry is actually a good place to be. Yes. More than 30% of the apprentices had experienced some kind of bullying. So when we asked directly, about 30%, when we asked indirectly about the type of things which would indicate bullying, it was actually even higher. A lot of the apprentices who had experienced bullying had significantly really poor mental health. 13% of them actually had poor mental health to such a degree that it would qualify for a diagnosis of severe mental illness. And more than 30% of them had so low social well-being that it would qualify for a depression diagnosis. So we're saying a significant part of the industry are not thriving. Big part of them are, but a significant minority is not thriving. Mm. And the other bit that we found out, we asked them, have you thought about suicide over the last 12 months? Is that something that have come to your mind? And really concerning to me was that more than 30% of the apprentices had actually had thoughts of suicide within the last 12 months. That makes sense, because we also find that the age profile for suicide in our industry is significantly younger than it is for other men in Australia. Mm. So it actually tells us that within our industry there's some things happening that means that young workers are not thriving as well as they should. Young workers actually become ill because of what's happening, and some people actually die because of what's happening. Yeah. And we have to do better than that. As a construction worker, we cannot accept that. And I don't think employers accept that. I don't think unions expect. This is not okay.
Yeah. That is an alarming statistic. And let's go through that again. That 30% of apprentices surveyed, almost 1 in 3, right, indicated having suicidal thoughts within the last 12 months. So that is a damning stat in itself. Suicidal thoughts among the Australian population in general is 2.3%. So you can see that's almost, 14 times greater. And we're talking about 30% for the construction apprentices. Based on this study, why is the rate so high?
It's a difficult one. I think in a lot of ways, when you think about it, apprentices have one shot at it. Mm. Like, it's difficult to get an apprenticeship now and finding someone to take you on and all that. So when you get in there and it doesn't live up to your expectations, asking for help can be really difficult, because you think it might actually impact on, and for some people it will impact on their apprenticeship. But it is better to get out of an apprenticeship than not survive it. But we really have to, so for a lot of the apprentices, they feel that they're not actually capable of speaking up. They're not. They
So they not only don't speak up, they feel as though it would be against them career-wise to actually say something.
When we did the focus groups, we spoke to one particular apprentice who talked about having a nail gun pointed at his head and threatened to be shot. This young fella had worked with that apprentice, with that tradesman before, and was working with that tradesman 2 or 3 months afterwards. That's not okay. Like that is a physical assault. People needs to be prosecuted for that. But for a young person to stay in that environment actually tells us what the odds are for them, and so it's a real concern. We have to be better at that as a community.
So what's going on with our young construction workers that it's having such a massive impact on their mental health? Why are they putting so much pressure mentally on themselves?
The interesting thing we found from the study was that the youngest workers, often when we talk about this, it's like a transition from school to work, and it's about trying to find your feet in the industry. The youngest workers, the 17 to 18-year-olds, were actually the ones who had the best mental health. And it was the apprentices who had been in the apprenticeship a little bit longer who were struggling the more. So it's perhaps when some of the reality and some of the day-to-day stuff starts kicking in, that this mental health and suicide is not that straightforward. When we talk about other workplace health and safety issues, we can see whether the handrail is missing. We can see whether the penetration is not covered. We take mental health with us from home to work. We take all our life with us in terms of our mental health, and that impacts on how we deal with things. And then something happens to us at work that either makes it worse or better and stuff like that. So it's not so much...
It's not an individual thing, it's a combination.
Yeah, we can't put a ban on it. We can't say, don't do that anymore. We just have to be more aware of it, and we have to actually start building more supportive work environments where we speak up. We're not bystanders. We don't accept it. We actually take responsibility for what we see when it happens to other people.
Again, you mentioned it earlier. We don't want to, bash the construction industry, but the results and the stats are clearly concerning. And there is, from my point of view, and I think there would be others that would say the same thing, a bullying culture, and it's a real issue within the industry. Can you explain what is bullying and what bullying is not, and give us some examples? I remember at one stage, I think it was one of a friend of ours' son, an apprentice, came home and explained the day he was gaffer taped in front of his peers, and every apprentice, that was their initiation.
And this is the difficult part of it, because we might have done things for yonks, and it's just been part of what we do as an industry. It's actually what makes this industry great. We have a fairly irreverent way of dealing with things, and our own language, our own way of doing things. So this is actually, we don't want to lose that. That's what makes us construction workers. That's what makes us who we are. What is important about bullying is how is it actually received. It's about checking in with the person. Was this actually funny? Like in my own time, I went through that. I was covered in grease, and I was nailed to the workbench, and all those kind of things. That would be unacceptable today.
Yes.
Culture have moved on, and we have to be prepared for that. We also have to be prepared for the fact that as an industry, the apprentices we have today are different to the apprentices we were when we went through. When I went through, I dropped out of school halfway through grade 9 because I went on strike. I was not going to do any more schoolwork, and the only way I was going to make anything was get...
Use the hands.
And that was what I did, and that's how I got into it. When you look at a lot of apprentices today, we have done year 12, we've got a driver's license, have done pre-vocations. They're actually very well prepared. So to expect them to accept what I accepted as a 15-year-old is not right. And that is actually what is bullying. What is bullying is when we repeat some behaviors on, and it's not received as fun. So bullying is defined by the receiver, not by the giver.
Could I then put it in simple terms, perhaps one generation's joke or fun is another generation's bullying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it happens with so many different things in life. When I came to Australia in 1988, I would have lit up a smoke, and we would have had a smoke. We don't do that anymore. There are things that changes over time, and this is one of them. We just have to get on board with it.
Thanks, Jorgen. The work environment and the culture obviously have a huge impact on apprentices. We'll talk in a minute about how workplaces, employers, supervisors and young workers can start to address these issues. But first, I want to talk a little bit about other factors that affect how young people operate in the workplace. There are a number of characteristics that are unique to younger workers compared to other workers. Can you tell us about them?
I think we have to be, like it takes a while for us to get experience, but even just physically developing. Like we have a different perspective of risk when you are 17, 18, 19, 20. And that's often why young workers get into as much trouble as they do. So we have different, and we need to allow for that we have different levels of development, even though that we employ adult people and they're young adult people. So there's certain things about that we need to have a little bit of extra care around and just be aware that we don't have the full picture yet and we don't have the full experience. But I also think that we need to accept that we don't have the same power. When I've been in the trade of a supervisor, I've been, got a long, so I lose my job, it's another 6 months and I get another one if it's really bad. Yeah. We don't have, so we actually need to really be prepared to be nurturing around the younger people. We actually need to be prepared to check in with them and say, how's this actually going with you? Is that all right? And was that fun? Are you thriving in your apprenticeship? Are you getting out of it what you want? Because that's why they're there, isn't it?
And I guess the old days of, the supervisor disappearing, working in another section, leaving the young apprentice unsupervised all day, not checking in until the end of the day is really risky and probably something that we could leave behind from yesteryear.
Both in terms of physical risk, in terms of mental risk, but also in terms of actually teaching their apprentices, particularly there to learn. And that requires supervision.
Yeah. So if you're a young worker in your team, or if you have a young worker in your team, no matter what size business or what year they are into their apprenticeship, understanding these attributes should be a starting point to help them develop and gain experience and confidence, as Jorgen has told us. There is a great toolkit on our website, the Young Worker Safety Toolkit, that helps employers understand these characteristics and encourages action in the workplace to build the capabilities of supervisors, managers, and of course those young workers. If a young worker is less likely to speak up or recognise safety risks, and they are being bullied or experiencing some personal struggles on top of that, it is really easy to see how it can affect their mental well-being. And the events of this year are adding even more pressure onto our apprentices. How has COVID-19 impacted on the industry and in particular young workers, Jorgen?
This has been a tough time, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that we're still going towards an even tougher time to come, and that's really concerning. And often the younger workers are perhaps the most vulnerable workers in the industry, because when businesses start downsizing and starting to do what they have to do to survive a very difficult climate, you do what you have to do, and you maintain your assets, and perhaps a lot of the apprentices would be in a difficult and a vulnerable position. But I also think that it's going through this period we've had, we need to really focus on what is it actually people need, rather than one of the things we really experienced in Mates as the COVID crisis hit was that the construction industry is a face-to-face industry. We don't read a lot, we don't write a lot, we don't we talk and we interact and stuff like that. When we started to self-isolate and socially isolate and start shutting down, for instance, we found that a lot of workers, our case management within Mates increased. More and more workers actually came forward and said, I need some support now because I'm struggling. We tried to refer them through to counselling, which we often do, but the counselling was only offered online or by video. And it meant that although that the need for the services through case management actually increased, our counselling delivery actually decreased because people couldn't get the service in the way that was actually appropriate to their culture. So I think that when we particularly talk to young workers, but talk to the industry, we can't just have one say, this fits you. We have different cultural context, and what works in a white collar type scenario will not work in a blue collar type scenario where we come with different history and different background.
In the midst of a pandemic, what are the emerging issues that are faced by young apprentices, young workers? Because we should say that there are also older apprentices who are not experienced, so they're in the same boat. They may be a little wiser as far as the headspace is concerned, but they lack experience as far as work is concerned. And how are they affecting their mental health? Like, you know, there's got to be a juggling thing here.
Well, this is a really worrying trend, and what came very early, because we were fortunate fortunate as you can say in the pandemic, but when the crisis hit, the construction industry was able to continue working as an essential service. So as workers, we went to work, and it took a little while for us as an industry to work out how to do this differently and safely and all this. So a worker went to work at a time when everything was shutting down, and people were starting working from home, people were withdrawing, school was closing. And we are worried about our families just like everybody else. And we went to the same work sites and often worked in the same areas and the same lunchrooms and stuff like that. So you had that sort of stuff where service was withdrawing from us. There was almost am I putting my family at risk? What happens if our industry have an outbreak? Am I going to be stood down before JobKeeper and all those kind of things came in?
Bring it home?
Yeah, we're going to bring it home. So all of those kind of things were really big issues, and it was. So what we found in Mates Construction was a lot of the focus on the preventative work we're doing through training people and making people supportive of each other in terms of giving them the skills. That shut down because that was sort of not the absolute most important thing. And we then had to find other ways to say, how do we actually get out to workers and are where they are in a way, in a place where they're comfortable to connect with us, where we can actually do it face to face, or we can do it in a way that we are more comfortable. Because asking for help is hard.
It is difficult.
It is hard. You know, I remember when we first started Mates Construction, and we've been doing it for a few years, and I was going through a separation, and you know, life happens to us, doesn't it? So I was moving into this little unit, and I was having a dark night, and I thought, well, you know, I've handed out 10,000 pens with phone numbers saying seek help. So I wasn't going to call my number because I didn't really want to talk to myself, but I thought I'm going to call the men's helpline. So I called the men's. I hung up 3 times before I had the guts to stay on the line for somebody who actually answered the phone on the other end. That gives me an enormous respect for somebody to have the guts to reach out and say, I'm not coping, I'm not all right. Like, I was in the business of telling people to do this. Yeah. And I found, so it actually means to me that what we need to do is we don't need to tell people to reach out for help. We need to reach into them. We need to say, how are you going, Chris?
Yeah.
What's going on for you?
Mobile devices get such a bad rap these days that they're overused. Can they be used as a tool to get to people, to reach out to people that could be potentially struggling?
Of course they can, but we have to be careful that they don't just become a cheaper way of doing what we're doing. Otherwise, it's not necessarily the most effective way. What is effective is, what often happens to us when we are in crisis is we keep a stiff upper lip. We keep going because, and often we will go to work because that's where so much of our hope sits, our ability to earn a crust and deliver.
But it's also the Aussie attitude. You keep going.
You keep going, yeah.
Trudge through it.
And we'll try to keep it together.
Yeah.
And we do our very best, and it's a little bit like balancing, but we're not very good at it. Yeah. So what happens is that you're much more likely to pick up when I'm struggling if you know me, if we're together. So it's about saying, how do we actually have that language where you can actually offer help to me, offer support to me? Say, Chris, that's not you. You're normally chatty. You're normally all these kind of things, and you're not today. That's not you. How do we can do that? And then what happens for me, who's in a crisis, who's trying to keep it together, who reaching out for help is really difficult, because part of reaching out for help is to admit that I'm not in control of my own life, and I'm a fixer, and I'm supposed to fix stuff when it's broken, and I can't fix my life.
No problem.
Yeah. Somebody actually reached into me. That means that I have enough value to you for you to actually notice me. And we've already taken the first step. Yeah.
It is such a complex issue with a lot of factors influencing the outcomes for young workers. We know that every employer must have systems in place to help and support workers. What are the basics for a system to successfully manage mental health risks in construction particularly?
I think this is a great way of coming at it. There's 2 ways we can look at this. We want to create mental well-being in the workplace, absolutely, because having a healthy workplace is a good workplace. But we also want to manage risk. It's 2 things we need to do. Managing risk is a law. Creating well-being is a really good thing as well. So we need to have systems in place to do that. In the construction industry, maintenance construction is part of those systems. We've developed the Blueprint for Better Mental Health and Suicide Prevention, which is a document that is supported bipartisan across the industry at a national level, that can give employers some guidelines and support about what is the practical ways of actually creating a mentally healthier workplace in your particular workplace. In terms of maintenance construction, the basics of it for us is a good way to manage risk is actually to put a system of early detection in place. So it'd be better if we can get to a point where we stop people getting in crisis. That's a big ask. But if we at least could pick up when people are in crisis and connect them to help as early as possible, we will save lives. So what we do in maintenance construction, we get onto a work site. We have a 1-hour conversation with everybody on site. We talk about what the issue of suicide and mental health look like as an industry, but it's our problem. It's a problem we have as an industry, employers, workers, government, everybody, and we have to solve it together. How do we need to fix it? We need to fix it by look out for each other. What does it look like when one of our mates are struggling? How do we pick it up? How do you start a conversation around that? How do you connect people up to help? That takes about an hour. Everybody get a white sticker on the hard hat. It means that on this site we have a social contract around this. Keep being reminded this is what we're doing. We get volunteers from there, and somewhere between 20 to 30% volunteers. We go back to the employer and we try to train a minimum of 1 in 20 of the workers, as we call connectors. They get a green sticker. They get a 4-hour session where we talk about how do you actually start a conversation about mental health and suicide, and how do you motivate people to accept help. And then we have key workers on site which get a blue sticker. Like, we haven't got a lot of imagination when it comes to stickers, we just change the color. But they get a blue sticker and they get applied suicide intervention skills training. So when somebody is at risk, how do we actually give them that first aid that makes them safe for now? And when you think about it, this is what we do about safety. I've been in the industry for 30 years. I have done safety induction on every single site. I have done 30, 40, 50 safety inductions in my career. And let me tell you, they have a lot of similarities in them. But we keep doing it at every site because we want to remind you that this is what we do. This is a social contract on this site around safety. General awareness training is that. I go on site. They would have people I go to if the handrails are missing. There'll be the safety committee, the workplace health and safety officer. We have connectors. I have a heart attack on site. I will trust the builder's labourer to give me CPR. Absolutely prefer if he doesn't do the open heart surgery, but CPR, yep, here and now.
You've got good hands.
Yes, and the same thing with mental health. If people don't get that life-saving support when they are at risk, many people will not make it to the professional support they need.
I would guess that's particularly pertinent when they're trying to reach out. If they can't get that immediately, it could be your scenario where you've hung up 3 times before you actually engage in that conversation.
Absolutely, yeah.
The report, as we've spoken about, mentions key factors such as stress levels, attitudes to their own mental health and drug and alcohol use and abuse as other factors contributing to poor mental health. And we've spoken about the impacts of COVID-19 on young workers. Managers may not understand that their young workers need development to manage these issues as well. What can be done to support these other factors? So we're talking about the other stuff.
Absolutely. So the first thing is we have the best possible work environment. The other bit is to be as prepared for that work environment as possible. But it comes in that order because we can teach resilience to apprentices, but if we don't provide the right environment for them, it's an unfair skill to give them, to be honest.
They can't use it.
We can't use it because they need to have a receptive work environment to apply that resilience in. But there's, of course, stuff we know that when you come straight out of school, how do you have relationships? What is expected of you at work? What is your rights and duties at work? Suddenly you get a pay packet. With a pay packet come a risk of using that pay packet. And so what does that mean for drug and alcohol? How do we actually have a healthy relationship to drugs and alcohol? How do we deal with crisis? There's lots of skills that we actually know can really equip people for that. So there's a Mates Construction provide a life skills package for apprentices that give them some of those life skills tools, but these are the type of things we can actually give apprentices, that equipment to better deal with issues as they come up.
To make them make better decisions to put it in that kind of frame when they are confronted with difficult decisions to make?
Absolutely. How do you have a framework for making good decisions? How do you get the right advice? Yeah.
Thanks, Jorgen. There are some great practical ideas there for employers and supervisors and, of course, the young apprentices themselves. The solution is not one-dimensional, as we've mentioned before. It won't work with just one of these strategies. So it's an overarching strategy, really. Workplaces must have a system in place to manage mental health risks. That means creating a positive culture driven by leadership, good positive leadership, intervening early. That was one key message that Jorgen mentioned earlier. Early intervention, nice and early, and supporting recovery. So it's a threefold system that we need to employ. We have to invest time and resources to get educated, shift the culture, and create a supportive work environment. There are 2 presentations on our website, one for supervisors and one for young workers, that step through leadership, workplace culture, risk management, work design, and some suggested action you can take immediately to better understand and support young workers. We'll have a link to those at the end of this event, and I strongly encourage supervisors and apprentices to check them out. As you said, checking in regularly should be a part of the workplace system, Jorgen, but what do we need to be aware of when doing these check-ins? What are some of the warning signs? Because we're not experts in psychology and people skills. Warning signs that somebody's not coping, that they're struggling a bit, and ultimately may lead them to suicidal thoughts.
I think there are 3 things we really need to be aware of around the people. So people might go through life situations. So often life happens to us. And so it could be a separation, could be a death of a loved one. Lots of things that happen, often things that are about a loss. So somebody in your work environment have a loss of something, maybe a job, maybe financial security, maybe health. That's a starting point. Because something I had, they're no longer, how am I going to cope without that? What's happening? We start ruminating. Then we try to keep the business as normal because we don't really, I don't really want to burden everybody else with my problems and I got enough and all those kind of things that sits with that. So the next thing we're looking for is change the behavior. Somebody who's sort of normally chatty becomes a bit quiet. Somebody who's normally quiet becomes overly chatty. So we're looking for change in behavior, something that's a little bit out of the ordinary. Again, that doesn't tell us that somebody is suicidal or struggling, it just tells us that something is different. We add that to the fact that we know that they've had some sort of loss. The last bit is that we have a gut feeling, because sometimes we just know. We do. But often what happens is when we know those things that we sort of just feel is that we dismiss it. We don't dismiss it because we don't care, but we dismiss it because we are worried about not knowing what to do. So what we are saying is really what we're going for those 3 things is knowing that somebody have had a loss or some significant change to their life, noticing that there's some sort of change in behavior one way or another, going on that gut feeling, that tells us that it's time to pay some attention. What we then encourage people to do is to say, call out what it is you're saying. So, Chris, I know that you're going through those troubles at home, and I've noticed that you're suddenly biting my head off without any good reason whatsoever. And that gives me that sort of feeling that not all is right. Is that all right? Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's all right, it's fine, no problem. Well, is it? Really? So what we're trying to do is trying to give people the most possible room to actually allow.
So an opportunity for them to open up. Yeah. Is basically what you're trying.
And remembering that most people hang up 3 times before they have the guts to stay on the line. So give people plenty of room and be a bit probing and asking questions into it, because people know that you're doing it from a position of care and they're just testing you out. Say, can I actually trust you enough to go into this area which is about stigma and not coping and all those kind of things. And for you as a helper, be really upfront. So when I see this, I'm worried, could this be about suicide? Are you worried about suicide? Oh, no, I'm just going through a tough time. Oh, yeah, that's all right, but let's get some help anyway.
If a supervisor, peer friend or family member is worried about someone and has noticed some of the warning signs that you've spoken about, how can they approach this? How do we just open that door slightly ajar?
It's about asking those questions. It's calling out what you're seeing, offering people and ask the question. We ask the question. We have to recognize that the person who is struggling is the one doing the hard work. They're the ones who's hanging up on the phone. So it means that what we need to do is we need to ask questions in a way that shows that we are as comfortable as possible with the topic. This is why we really think it's important to have connectors and assist workers, or people who have these basic skills that are comfortable, that says, I actually know what to do about this. But even if you don't, keep a phone number handy and ask anyway, because what happens is when you're talking to people, they're not acting on their thoughts. They're actually engaging with you, and that's a good thing. Even, and what we have to remember, because quite often we shy away from this, there's a whole heap of professionalism around mental health, that you have to be doctors and of course they know what they're doing. But when somebody is struggling, their choice is not between the best qualified doctor and you. It's between you and nothing. And even bumbling and making mistakes and asking the wrong questions the wrong way is better than nothing. That's what we know from the statistics.
Look, there's no doubt it can be hard to initiate that conversation, but it could be life-changing. And I'll put this to you from your perspective as someone who's been at both ends of the spectrum. Wouldn't it be better to have asked the question and put your size 10 boots in your mouth and there's nothing really happening, than not have asked the questions at all and something happens to Fred, your co-worker, and you regret that for the rest of your life?
Absolutely. I think two things I want to say here first is we live our life forward. So quite often when we talk about these things, we look back and say, would have, should have, could have. And some people who might be watching this might have lost to suicide and then start asking, well, should I have it? No, we can only live forward. We can do things differently. We can't change what happened to us in the past. But going forward, I want people to think about, if you are asking somebody about suicide and about their mental health, and they're okay, what's the worst thing that could happen? The worst thing that could happen is that you have showed them you care and you have a bit of an awkward laughter and you move on. If you take the choice not to ask somebody about what's going on with them and they are suicidal, the worst thing that could happen is that you can actually lose a mate. So if you're weighing up the risk between losing a mate and having a bit of an awkward situation with someone, I know what I would take.
I'll go awkward any day.
Absolutely.
Any day. Sobering thoughts, and thank you for opening up about that, because that is an awkward situation that many of us would rather avoid than actually go through. We have young workers and apprentices watching today, Jorgen, as well as supervisors. So I'd like to put out a couple of scenarios for you to work through with me and get some advice out about how to manage these situations. These are generic. And let's call our young worker this time Mike for scenario one. He's in his second year of a structural apprenticeship with a medium-sized business, right? So that paints the picture of where he's at. He's recently moved out of his parents' home and has now got a bit of financial stress. So that's a stress he didn't have previously. He's got that now. With bills starting to get on top of him, it especially hits home at the end of every weekend after going out with his mates, living it up over the weekend, and it makes him feel like absolute crap, right? Since he started his second year there, are a couple of older workers who put him down daily. You know, the old typical scenario, you'll never make it in this industry, give up now before you embarrass yourself, and it goes on. It's been happening for months, and with the stress from home and his new living situation, he's feeling really down. He wants to give up. Mike talks to his supervisor, who tells him to toughen up, mate, just harden up, you'll get over it, come on. And it's just part of the gig. Obviously, there's poor support and a breakdown in the relationships in this workplace. Perhaps the supervisor's not skilled at all, doesn't want to go through the conversation. What should Mike do? He's been left out on a limb.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
What happens with these kind of things is when we have all these things going on, it becomes like a knot. One thing is tied in with another, and it seems like it all becomes one big problem. And where, like a bowl of spaghetti, how do you sort it out? It's completely all over the place. And how do you deal with it? It's hard because reaching out for help is also very difficult.
Yes.
It is important, however, to find that help somewhere. So, at a very simple level, call a helpline.
Yeah.
Be prepared to hang up.
Yeah.
And somebody, just sometimes we just have to do things that are difficult. What it often helps you with to talk to somebody else is you start being able to separate things out bit by bit. I remember one of the biggest things that I ever learned in my biggest crisis, and perhaps one of the things that kept me alive, was to breathe. Simple thing as to breathe. When all of those kind of things hit me for once, and it was like I felt like I was exploding, take a deep breath and be conscious of inhaling and exhaling, and suddenly I felt a level of control over what I was feeling, which was really... So what can we say? Well, you can go to the people who are having a go at you. Well, maybe that would help, maybe it will not help. Actually, perhaps the best thing is to actually find somebody to talk to. Mates in Construction is there 24/7, 1300 642 111. And there would always be somebody who can come down and just have that conversation. How do you breathe? How do you deal with one thing at a time? How do we actually sort it out? Maybe this apprenticeship is for you, maybe it's not for you. But let's not make decisions when everything is rambling. Let's make decisions when we can actually see things one thing at a time.
And I'll share something personally from me. In my situation, when I had a crisis in my life, and you've sought professional help and you've had some guidance, what seems like an insurmountable problem, then suddenly you have a new aspect to it. It's not as bad as you think it is.
No, it's an interesting thing when you engage in counselling. In some ways it could be a really disappointment because you think that somebody's going to come and tell you all the solutions to your problem. People just teach you some skills to actually sort your own problems out. And because you're gonna be your own driver on this and make decisions.
Look, I think it's so important for workers in this situation to know what is happening is wrong and they can take action. That's a very important basic factor. So sticking with this scenario, Jorgen, what should the supervisor have done differently?
This is a much more, because this is actually where we can do something in terms of the environment in some ways. This apprentice is exposed to a hazard at work. And we know how we deal with hazards at work, and we follow the hierarchy of control. We do a risk assessment, and they'll be quite clear if you did that in those circumstances as a supervisor, you would know that you would actually have a duty to intervene, and you have a duty to deal with this. One of the things is awareness. I don't think that, being been around in this industry for 20 or 30 years, probably 30 years at least, I haven't met too many bad people. Like I've met thoughtless people, I've met people who are all over the place, but I haven't met anyone who said, let me go out and hurt people, let me go out and injure people because that's what I feel like today. Nobody wakes up today and says, I'm going to be a bastard today. It's just not how we work. So sometimes it's actually about awareness. Actually going to people and say, what is bullying? What is the real impact of bullying actually? What does that mean for people who are exposed to bullying and stuff like that? Because my guess is that those tradesmen who puts Mike down, they're repeating what they're repeating, and they're doing it because they thought that's the way you bring apprentices up. One of the things that was really frightening when we got the report in 2006, the ASAP report that was a foundation, the focus groups amongst tradesmen was to say that tradesmen almost felt that bullying of apprentices was a duty because it's about hardening them up for the industry. Well, I don't want to work in an industry where you have to be hardened up.
And it's been passed down the line, hasn't it? It happened to me, so I'm going to take it out on the young guy.
We have to break the chain. Yeah.
And look, it does come back to having that system in place. Supervisors need to be proactive and show strong leadership to call out inappropriate behaviour and support young workers through tough times. All right, let's move on to scenario 2. This time we'll call our apprentice Jose. Jose is a 4th-year apprentice and he's been working on a large commercial project. He's got a couple of good mates on site and they catch up outside of work as well for a bit of social time. Jose's mate told him that some of the other workers had been playing petty practical jokes on him, belittling him and threatening him to end his apprenticeship if he told anyone about it. So he's sworn to secrecy, couldn't tell anyone. While he was always up for a laugh, the joke had gone way too far. He said it was happening so regularly now that he hated going to work. That's a bad place to be in for a start. Jose noticed his friend withdrawing from their social circle, drinking more, even blowing up at one of their friends for no real reason at all. He knew his friend was struggling. What steps should Jose take to help his mate? And he wants to help him.
The first thing is to make sure that Jose is safe. So we actually need to work out. It's not uncommon for people who are exposed to that to think that their own life has no value anymore to them. So the starting point is actually to talk about mental health and suicide. Say, I've noticed all of these things you're telling me about, all of that you're being exposed to this at work. That's hard. Sometimes when people are going through that much, they're actually thinking about ending their own life. They think they can't go through it. Is that what's going on? What we then ask is, if that is the case, then listen, hear the story about that, because what's happening at work is things that's happening to you. What happens with suicide is what you feel about it. So we actually say, what do you actually feel about it? Because often when we connect with what we feel about these kind of things, we become a lot less certain. We become a lot more confused about it. And then we then start saying, well, actually, perhaps we're not so certain about what's going on now. Maybe we should just give it a rest. Yeah. Maybe we should just stay safe for now and just move on. And perhaps we can do some things at least with it. At the end of the day, this plan belongs to Jose, because he would know what it is that actually drives him. Yeah. So we then start talking about, okay, how can we deal with this? Is there anyone who could potentially help you with those? Can you talk to your supervisor? Yeah. Can you talk to a counselor? Can you talk to your union? Can you talk to a co-worker on site? What sort of resources have you have? But Jose and the mate would actually work that out together. Yeah. What is often the temptation, Chris, is that you tell me about a problem, I know exactly what it is because I've been through it myself. And I said, what you need to do is you need to go and talk to your supervisor, and then you need to talk to your mum and dad, and you need to call this meeting and do it by tomorrow. When we do it this way, you have absolutely no investment in this, okay? Yeah. And you don't want to be told what to do. So it's actually, so what we are saying to people is what we want to do is we want to actually connect with people and how they feel about it. Help people realize that it's not that clear as you see it, and let's work a plan out together about how we actually deal with it.
It is quite a common scenario, I think, for the industry where apprentices become the brunt of the joke, as I mentioned at the beginning of our program, where it's not having a laugh or just a joke. It's important for apprentices to realise this is actually bullying and it's not okay. If you're experiencing something like this, or you see it happening in your workplace, there are actions you can take, as Jorgen has mentioned, to call this unacceptable behaviour out. So call it straight away. Call it. Yeah. I don't appreciate it. Supervisors, for you need to act when these scenarios are brought to your attention. Don't put it under the carpet. Don't put it in the too hard basket. Progress it, move it, act on it. Hopefully these examples have given our apprentices some tools and resources and a bit of confidence so that they can understand when to speak out, when to speak up, how to speak up, and where they can go if they aren't well supported in the workplace. There are alternatives. Again, if I can refer you to a couple of resources on our website, there are 2 films called The Right Start that play through some scenarios with young workers in construction and give a great insight into the role and influence supervisors and managers have. Go and view the films, show them to your workers, and be a positive influence. Maybe we can then just change everybody's attitude and the way they react and act. Finally, Jorgen, you've worked with the industry on suicide prevention for a long, long time, and the MATES program is recognised globally for what it's done and what it is doing and what it's going to do in the future. Can you tell us about some of the progress you have seen in the industry? And you said you didn't want to bash the construction industry. Here's your chance to talk it up again. Has there been some positive change, particularly in the mental health space?
Absolutely. I think this is probably one of the, when you're working things from day to day, it's easy that you can't actually see the big picture because you're in the middle of the reeds. But when I look back to how the industry was looking at this topic in 2008, and I look at the conversations we're having today, it has become better. We know that the suicide rates have been falling. The relative risk of suicide has been coming down. We can't claim any sort of causal relationship with that, but certainly things are getting better. The fact that we are having discussions about general mental health and well-being in the workplace now was not discussions we had in 2008. So we are moving in the right direction. We are taking it on board, and people are actually driving it and thriving on taking this on board as their issue. So I think that that we come a long way. I still think that we've got a way to go. But this is actually one of the things that I think is really encouraging. The construction needs to have a long history of taking big issues on board And we often have this view of the industry as being this sort of, confrontationist place with all those kind of things. We actually have a long history as an industry of taking big issues on collectively as an industry and dealing with them and making a difference. Mm-hmm. And I think that over time we look back at mental health and suicide prevention and say, yep, this was one of those issues we actually tackled as a united industry to make a difference because we just couldn't accept it.
And we should be proud of it.
We should be proud of it, absolutely.
And it shows that we can change attitudes, we can change trends, and ultimately we can change culture. We can minimise the risks and reduce the rates of suicide for young workers in construction. We simply must, and we can't stop. Even though you've said we're moving in the right direction, Jorgen, we have to keep going. Just before you go, can you give us your top 3 or 4 actions that supervisors and their apprentices can take away from today? We've had a big, long discussion about the issue and the trends, but what are some practical tips, 3 or 4 of those they can take away from today's program?
I think firstly we need to increase understanding of bullying in the workplace, not just for apprentices but also for us as tradesmen or more experienced people within the industry. So actually understand what it is and understand that this is something that is moving. B, we need to make sure that apprentices have a voice when they feel that they are being apprentices. Actually make sure that there's somebody who will believe you, somebody who will accept you when you come this, and make it very clear to the apprentice that this resource is available to you. I think the other bit we need to make aware is we need to make aware that mental health and suicide is an issue that affects all of us within the industry, and we need to maintain that momentum of actually raising awareness and early intervention within the industry ongoing, beyond this issue of bullying being a specific part of it, but at a broader level as well. And I think we need to consider mental health and suicide as part of our workplace health and safety obligations. I think that in 1988, safety was slightly different in this industry than it is today. We've now made it much more of a normal way of doing business, that when we set the sites up, we have plans and we have processes and we have ways we manage it. We actually need to get to the same place in terms of mental health.
I think that's a great way to wrap up our in-depth and informative chat. Thanks again, Jorgen, for joining me today and for the work you do in suicide prevention, and mates as well, of course. It's been a tough subject, but a necessary one. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Keep up the great work.
Thank you very much, Chris.
I'd like to remind our viewers that if this discussion has caused any distress and you or someone you know is looking for support or help, contact 000 immediately if it is an emergency, or Lifeline's 24-hour hotline on 131114. We will have a list of resources and websites available on the closing screen of this event and on the website. We'll link to the resources I have mentioned previously and throughout this program, but also information on work-related stress, health and well-being and risk management. Managers, supervisors and peers, remember that everyone has different levels of resilience. After today, I hope you will look for ways you can provide your apprentices with additional guidance and support to create a safe workplace where no one walks past and accepts inappropriate behaviour. No more turning a blind eye. To all the construction apprentices out there, you are the future of this industry and you are valued. I hope you feel more empowered to speak out for yourself and your mates. Hopefully everyone watching this will take what you've learned here and commit to doing better to support apprentices, improve mental health outcomes and prevent suicide for young workers in construction. Thank you all for watching. A speaker from an earlier OIR safety webinar, Dave Burt, gave us 5 words which may just open an awkward conversation and save someone's life, even a mate of yours. What's happening in your world? Feel free to use them. On behalf of Workplace Health and Safety Queensland and mates in construction, look out for each other. Work safe, home safe.